Skull Rock Podcast is brought to you by the generosity of the following companies. The Old Mill Press, publishing beautifully crafted books that illuminate our world. To learn more, visit theoldmillpress.com. And by listeners like you.
Hi, I'm Terry Shakespeare, and I'm one of the founders of Creative Capers Entertainment.
Hi, I'm David Molina. I'm one of the founders of Creative Capers Entertainment, and you're listening to Skull Rock Podcast.
Aye, mateys, remember this as the day you sailed with the Skull Rock Podcast. Proceed at your own risk, and mark well me words, mateys. Dead men tell no tale.
Welcome back to another edition of Skull Rock Podcast, the show about all things Disney and pop culture. Every week we take you behind the scenes of some of your favorite Disney films, theme park attractions, performances, books, and music, as well as what's streaming, what's playing in theaters, and what's happening in this universe of entertainment. I'm Aljon Go, musician and longtime Disney, Marvel, Star Wars, and pop culturist, and big fan. You can email me, Aljon, A-L-J-O-N, at skullrockpodcast.com.
And I'm Dave Bossert, artist, filmmaker, author, and welcome to the Skull Rock Podcast. If you love Disney and pop culture, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. You can also like and follow us on Facebook, X, Blue Sky, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. You can also email me at dave@skullrockpodcast.com.
All right, Skull Rock fam, this is going to be a little shorter of an episode. I'm feeling a little under the weather, and Dave is heading across country so that we can all meet up at the Animation Y'all Expo this weekend in Nashville. Hope everyone can come out. For more details, of course, click on our show notes. Hopefully I'll be able to have a little bit of rest between now and then, and Dave will make it safely so that we can entertain you all and meet every single one of you out there for Animation Y'all this weekend. So our guest this week is Robert Lence. He's been involved in some of the best animated films of all time, including being storyboard artist, head of story, writer, director, screenwriter, visual development artist, story consultant, lecturer, and so much more. He's been working on Beauty and the Beast, The Lion King, Toy Story, Bug's Life, and Shrek, just to name a few. So let's sit back and relax and listen to this very first part of our interview with the great Robert Lence, right here on Skull Rock Podcast. Enjoy.
Skull Rock Podcast, interview time.
Well, Aljon, we've got another fantastic guest here on the Skull Rock Podcast. We've got Robert Lence, a storyboard artist and just all-around great artist and good friend from many years in the business. Robert, welcome to the Skull Rock Podcast.
Thank you very much, Dave and Aljon. Very glad to be your guest today. Thank you so much.
So, Robert, I always ask our guests the question, how did you get involved in getting into animation? When did that start?
Well, I was born in New York City. I'm from Forest Hills, Queens. I think you're a New Yorker too, aren't you, Dave?
Yeah, I'm next door in Astoria, Queens.
Oh, look at that. We're both Queens boys.
Yeah, and in fact, my sister lives in Woodside.
That's fantastic. That's where I'm from, and all my relatives and everything are from there.
Yeah.
So I grew up in Forest Hills, Queens. Forest Hills Gardens was actually a beautiful neighborhood. It was actually designed by Olmsted, the same guy who designed Central Park.
Yeah.
Beautiful, Tudor homes and everything. Beautiful area. And grew up, what else interesting about that? I grew up just blocks away from Forest Hills Stadium, Forest Hills Tennis Stadium, where they held the U.S. Open. For many years until 1977, it moved away, and also was a concert venue. And the Beatles played there in 1964.
Wow.
I was too young to go, but my sister went to the concert, heard the Beatles play, and the stadium was so close, Dave, that you could hear the music playing like in the streets. Whoever was playing in the stadium, you could hear like the music wafting through the streets. So we heard I Want to Hold Your Hand and all the Beatles songs sort of wafting through the streets of our neighborhood. How cool is that?
That's so fantastic.
It's also, what was the other noteworthy thing about Forest Hill Stadium? It's the place where, believe it or not, Jimi Hendrix was booed off the stage.
Really?
He was the pre-act. He was the opening act for the Monkees.
Wow.
And all the teeny boppers were like, we want the monkeys. And they, if you can believe it, the great Jimi Hendrix got
Wow.
off the stage. And
What
afterwards,
what what year was that?
he said, I think it was 1965
Wow.
or 65, 66, something in
Yeah.
there. And then, or it could have been 67. Anyway, late 60s. And he said afterwards, wrong audience, wrong crowd. They wanted Mickey Mouse. They wanted Mickey Mouse, not Jimmy. So anyway, grew up in that wonderful neighborhood of Forest Hills Gardens. And thing, maybe you can relate to this too, Dave. Like if you live in LA, like your uncle's friend's barber knows somebody who works in animation or something. There's some connection, to Disney
Right.
or animation.
Sure.
New York City was very far away. It was 3,000 miles away and had no connection to the animation business or to Disney at all. However, that changed in 1964. A big thing happened. I didn't get to go to Disneyland as a kid, didn't get to visit a studio, but Disney came to us. In 1964, the 1964 New York World's Fair, Walt designed 4 rides for it with his Imagineers.
Yeah, 4 attractions. Yeah.
4 attractions for it, right? So I didn't go to Disneyland, but Disneyland came to us. The 4 attractions were Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln,
Yeah.
which when it first debuted, I got to say it wasn't called Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln. It was called Meh, Okay Moments with Mr. Lincoln. And they had like Abe doing his wood chopping technique for building the log cabin, his catch can wrestling techniques. Supposedly he had a great arm drag, they said, and Mary Todd's skillet cornbread recipe, things like that. It wasn't until 65 that they got the idea. No, it should be bigger moments, big
Yeah.
moments. Gettysburg Address, great moments with Mr. Lincoln. What other rides? The other one, Carousel of Progress, which is still at Walt Disney World the last time I went, right?
The GE
The GE is a great
carousel.
big beautiful tomorrow.
Yeah, and the Small
The third
World.
one. Did you go as a child too, Dave?
Something. If I was taken there, I don't remember it because
Okay.
I was very young.
Okay.
So,
I was just sure.
but you had Lincoln, you had the GE Carousel of Progress, you had the Ford Pavilion.
Ford Magic Skyway was amazing.
Yeah,
I think that
yeah.
made the biggest impression upon me as a boy. It was just so cool. You got to ride around in an open air Ford convertible
Yeah.
as through like a prehistoric landscape of like dinosaurs and brontosaurus
Yeah.
and cavemen like chucking spears at mastodons. That made it to the park. If you go like in the train ride when it goes
Yeah.
into the park part.
It was the prehistoric diorama, or
Right.
the primeval diorama.
Right.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that made it into I guess they all made it eventually into the park. And then the fourth one was obviously Small World, right?
Yeah,
With
yeah.
Mary Blair and Mark and Alice Davis and everything.
Yeah.
Designed that, and that was amazing thing too. Uh, um,
So that was I mean that made an
that was like
impression.
that was Disney
Yeah.
came to us, and they made a big impression upon me as a boy.
Yeah.
The what else?
How old were you then?
I would have been
64,
about
65.
4 or 5. I would have been about 5 or 6, so like perfect
Okay.
age
Yeah.
to experience that, in which you'd usually take a kid to.
Yeah,
Disney.
yeah.
So that made a big impression upon me, and then I went to Forest Hills High School, which was sort of on a hill overlooking Flushing Meadow Park.
Right.
And so, like, you could see Shea Stadium and all the rides and everything after the park shut down in 65. All those buildings were still standing, or most
Sure.
of them were. They took some down. And you can still see them today. If you're like in Manhattan and you're driving to JFK on the Grand Central Parkway, if you're taking an Uber, you
Yeah.
look off to the left and there's the two towers.
And the giant globe. Yeah.
Unisphere is still there. And the Tent of Tomorrow Terrace on the Park is still there. It's where my high school prom was held, the Terrace on the Park
Wow.
too.
Wow.
So I knew that area well. I ran high school cross country and track, and that was our training ground. I spent hours walking, not walking, running through walls, jogging and walking and running
Yeah.
through, well, hopefully not walking if I was on the track team, hopefully not race walking, but running through all those. So very familiar to me, and they're still, standing, most of them, and was a big part of my life. Other big influence as a kid, my parents weren't real encouraging with me in the arts. And I'll tell you why. I mean, my dad was a child of the Great Depression. My dad, lived through the 1930s Great Depression. So he was like, Bob, you want to be an artist? You'll starve. You'll live in a garret in Greenwich Village. I don't think he knew that I wanted to do more like cartooning and commercial art.
Yeah.
In all fairness, there weren't a lot of jobs for artists during the Great Depression. And then also later on in life, he did encourage me in it because he was the one who said, you want to get into writing. He goes, look at all the shows on cable TV and everything. They need writers. Every one of those programs, there's hundreds of channels and they all need writers. So he did, eventually encourage me.
What'd your dad do for a
My
living?
dad had we could do a whole podcast on that. We won't. A very interesting life. He was an entrepreneur. He started as a dressmaker in the garment center. He had Lence dresses in the garment center in Manhattan on 7th Avenue. From there, like I said, it's a whole other story. He then got into boxing promoting. He was a boxing promoter and had a whole string of bowling alleys. He built Woodhaven Lanes, which was in my neighborhood in
Oh,
Queens.
wow.
So he had a really interesting, very, very colorful
Yeah.
guy and sort of like a daring entrepreneur type guy with a really interesting life. So and I was always probably, like you too, like always the class artist as a kid. I was always known as being like the class artist in grade
Yeah.
school and everything. But when it was also, I went to Forest Hills High School, which is a New York City public high school. However, it was almost like a high school for the arts in that like sports were de-emphasized. We had sports teams and I played on them, but like there was like no fans or anything. The big event of the year was the school play. It was called Sing, and it was a juried show, sophomore, junior, senior classes, and the jurors would be like people from Broadway and everything, and it was the big deal. There was no homecoming football game. We didn't even have a football team or wrestling team. It was all about the school play. It was like the big event of the year.
Wow.
So that was a big deal. Probably a lot of people who went to high school in America would have liked.
So you were the class artist, and when you graduated, what did you decide to do with that?
So when it was time to go to college, I thought I would go like in pre-law or pre-business, and I went to a regular four-year university. I went to University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, and the way that I chose that was my older brother George he went to SUNY Binghamton his first 2 years. Then he was transferring with a bunch of friends who were going to grad school at Michigan. So a whole bunch of my brother's friends and him were going to Ann Arbor. So I applied, and it was the best school I got into. So I went. I had never been on campus before I arrived in Ann Arbor. And I thought I would do like pre-law, pre-business or something like that, but I didn't like those classes and I wasn't particularly good at them. But I really gravitated, towards the film classes. And so I started taking my first classes in the film school. I wound up majoring in English literature, which was good. Looking back, it's like an undergirding of all that. It was just reading and writing, papers and reading classic, literature. So it sort of tied in with what I would eventually do. And another big thing that I did was during my time there, I started doing cartoons for the school paper, for the Michigan Daily. So I did a daily comic strip, which was like always my love was to be like a comic strip artist. So I did a daily strip that ran in the Michigan Daily. And I also did a cartoon on football Saturdays, a sports cartoon. If you know Michigan, it's a big football school, the Michigan Wolverines.
Yeah.
So I did, that was
Don't they have like the largest football stadium? It's like
100,000, the big
70,000
house,
fans or something.
100,000
100,
plus. And
There
sell
you
out
go.
the big house.
It's the biggest college
It
stadium,
is. It's
right?
big, and they break all
Yeah.
the attendance
Yeah.
records and
Yeah.
everything. And 100,000, and even back then, 100,000 per game, and
Wow.
big football school. So I did. That was, I think, my first paid gigs as a cartoonist was for the Michigan Daily. And so during my time at Michigan, I was like, I'm liking my film classes. And Michigan's a big school, 40,000 undergrads, so big school. You could kind of like find yourself. There was a great array of classes. Film classes I took were amazing. I mentioned one. In one film class, they had George Romero come and guest speak. He's the
Really?
director of Night of the Living Dead.
Yeah, the original Night of the Living
Michigan
Dead, the
one.
original zombie movie.
Yes, the one that sort of defined the genre. And he had great stories about the making of that film. Sort of gave me a taste too for, like filmmaking, independent filmmaking.
Yeah.
He had great stories about how it was very like ad hoc and impromptu and thrown together and how it became this iconic thing. So that was pretty cool. So at the end of my time at Michigan, I graduated with a BA in English literature. And I was like, well, I'm not sure what I want to do or be, but I know that I want to do something in the arts. So after I graduated, I said, let me go back to Michigan's art school. So I went to Michigan's art school for 1 year and just took like all the basic classes. And I figured, like, I'll see, is this for me? And is this right for me? They had one class in animation. And we did like a hand-drawn 2D film. I remember the professor's name is Paul Tassi. And we did a short, animated film. And we shot it like sort of like an Oxbury type camera and everything. I mean, we shot it like frame by frame. And we had like our own little student show. And when the class was over, the professor said, if anybody's interested in this, if anybody wants to go into this, the place to go to is called CalArts. It's in Valencia, California. It's in Los Angeles, California. That's the school that Walt Disney founded to train his artists. So that was my introduction to first hearing about CalArts. I got to say, too, I didn't do like the most amazing student film in the class or anything. Mine was sort of middling, but it was my first time like a light bulb went off in my head. CalArts, okay. So I didn't immediately apply. My first love was I wanted to be like Charles Schulz. I wanted to have like a cartoon strip, because that's what I did for the Michigan Daily.
Yeah.
So I came up with some comic strip ideas and sent them off to the syndicates, and that's a tough field to break into,
Right.
too. So at the same time, I'm still in Ann Arbor. I stayed in Ann Arbor. My other great love in life is restaurants and cooking and food. So I was working at the local restaurant, which was my student job. I was also the head cook at a fraternity house and a sorority house at Michigan too, and worked at this great Italian restaurant called Cottage Inn, and then later at one great like fancy French restaurant called Alexandra's. And so that was like wasn't sure if I wanted to go to like art school or chef school.
Yeah.
It was going to be like, either one. Either, I wanted to apply to CalArts, CIA, California Institute of the Arts, or I might have applied to Culinary Institute of America. So either way, I was going into the CIA.
Yeah, exactly.
So during my time of like getting rejections from the syndicates, I was like, well, what about that art school in California? It sounds like something where you could learn a trade and then So I finally applied. I did not get in. The first time I applied, I threw together a portfolio. I didn't know what they were looking for or wanted. I just sort of threw together a portfolio and sent it off, got rejected. At the same time, my roommate at Michigan, we were a very like odd couple. I was like a 5'2" wrestler, and he was like a 6'4" offensive lineman for the Michigan Wolverines. And his senior year, he ran the table. He was All-American, All Big Ten, team captain, and they won the Rose Bowl. So he was like all everything, and he got drafted by the Los Angeles Rams. So he was living in Los Angeles playing for the Rams, and then he left the Rams and got picked up by the New York Jets. So his house was sitting vacant in Los Angeles. So that was my entree to California. He said, Bob, why don't you come out to California? My house in LA is sitting vacant. When you come, you can house it for me and you can try to get into the art school you want to get into. So that was my entree to Los Angeles.
Wow. And that happened like, were you at Michigan State for 4 years or
not
2
Michigan. It's the
or
University of Michigan.
I mean, excuse me.
CalArts
I'm
and
sorry.
art.
Yeah.
We'll make that mistake all the
Were
time.
you at the University of Michigan for the full 4 years, or did you
I
leave?
did. So I went 4 years. I graduated with
Yeah.
a BA in English literature. I then went back to Michigan's art school 1 year. So I had 5 years at Michigan.
Okay.
And then I hung around Ann Arbor, doing mainly like cooking jobs and trying to
Yeah.
get my cartoon strip going.
Yeah.
So I finally left like in the summer. That was the summer of 1984. So I didn't. Funny story too, Dave. Maybe relate to. I grew up in New York City. When I grew up in Forest Hills, Queens, but we moved into Manhattan. And when we did, it's like from like my junior and senior years of high school, we sold the family car because it's expensive and hard to park.
And you don't need it. You don't
Yeah,
need
we
it.
don't need it.
Yeah.
I used to take the subway back from Manhattan back to Forest Hills High School. So I grew up, I didn't go to driver's ed like the other kids. So I'm like 25 now and I don't know how to drive. So I took my first driving lessons in Ann Arbor. I passed my driving test and I bought like a beat up old 1976 orange Chevette and packed up all my belongings and hit the highway for California in the summer of 1984.
Wow.
When I hit the highway, I had hardly ever driven on a highway or freeway. It was like my first time. It was like a grand adventure. And that little orange Chevette, God bless it, it made it cross country barely. It like broke down when I got to California, but it got me there, made it like up the Rocky Mountains. And then I think I just coasted the whole way down into the plains of LA. I met my friend George's wife, Meg. She handed me the keys to the place, and then she was off to New York to join him with the Jets.
Yeah.
And I didn't know a soul in Los Angeles. So the first thing I did was I got in my car, got it fixed, got up there, and drove up to Valencia, drove up to Cal Arts, and I met with the director of the program, who was Bob McCrae, very fine gentleman.
Yeah, so Jack Hanna, who had headed the program, had retired, and Bob stepped in as the head for a few years, right?
Bob took over. He was an old Disney guy. He was the head of the
Yeah.
program for a couple of years. And very patient, very kind with me, looked at my portfolio, looked at my stuff. He said, son, you're not there yet. You need to take every life drawing, figure drawing class you can, go to the mall, go to the zoo, and, just be drawing. So I took his advice. One other funny thing I'll mention about, like, I still remember that first trip up to Cal Arts in the summer of 1984. When I was driving up on the left-hand side, if you look over, all of that land, Stevenson Ranch, which means something to you, was
Yeah.
all cow pastures. It was literally, you just saw cattle like dotted on the hills.
Yeah.
None of that, the buildings that were there in Stevenson Ranch were there. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
So it was all
The only
behind.
thing that was on that side of the freeway, if you remember, was Valencia painted on the side of a hill.
All right.
Yeah, that was
Right.
it.
Awesome town.
Yeah.
Awesome didn't come later. Right.
Yeah, Awesome came, 40 years later, but
Right. Right. And Tips, I remember Tips like right before you got
yeah,
to.
yeah. Tips was at Lyons Avenue. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So I was down in Orange County because the Rams back then used to play in the stadium where the Angels play now.
Right.
And so they were in Orange County based. So he was in the city of Orange. So I house sat for him, and I would drive up to Santa Monica, take life drawing classes, and take every drawing class I could. Would draw all night.
But was that at Santa Monica Community College?
Some of them I did. I think was at
Yeah.
Santa Monica Community College.
Because they have a great art program. In
Yeah.
fact, when I talk to people who are just starting out and looking, because Cal Arts is so pricey, at this point, I tell people, take all your basic classes at like Santa Monica Community
Right.
College.
I tell that to students too, like to get
Yeah.
your prerequisites and get everything done out of the way at a
Yeah.
community college where the price is much cheaper.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's what I did. I took the classes, and the only work that I knew was restaurant work. I applied to like every restaurant in Orange County. I pounded the pavement. I must have hit, Dave, like 40 to 50 restaurants. Nobody was hiring. I finally got a job at a fast food restaurant called No Woods Hamburgers, sort of a small mini chain in Orange County. And I would work during the day, flipping hamburgers and making fries, and then draw until late at night, burning the midnight oil, working on my drawings.
Wow. Wow.
And then I would meet, Bob McCrae was great to me. I would drive up periodically to meet with him, and he'd look at my stuff. He'd go, son, you're not there yet. Keep working at it. Keep working at it. So after about 6 months of that, in sort of December of that year, I went up to Cal Arts. I showed him my portfolio, and he said, okay, son, I can see how hard you work for this. And, your stuff is finally there. I'm going to let you into the program. You're in the character animation program. So it's like, all right, I got in.
You were persistent, and and you listened to him,
Yeah. Yes.
and you kept coming back and improving.
Yes. And he was patient. That's what you need too. I told you,
Yeah.
you need like one person who's like patient and will work with you,
Yeah.
right? He wasn't blowing me off. He was patient and working with me, and like, he had great patience. So he finally let me in the program.
What year was that?
It would have been in winter of 1984, like December of 1984. He said, okay, you're in.
Okay, good.
So the only problem was I had no money. I mean, you don't make a lot flipping hamburgers.
Yeah.
And CalArts was expensive back then, as you know. It wasn't the crazy expensive that it is now, but it was still,
I would argue it was still, in relative terms, it was
Right.
still crazy expensive.
right, right. So it was still far more than I could afford. So
Yeah.
what I did was I moved back home to New York, and my parents were very gracious. They took me in. They said, "You can live with us, and you can work, and you'll probably make more, working at a place in New York." So, at the same time, my sister worked for an employment agency where they placed temporary employees. So she got me a job working as a paralegal in a law firm, great big Wall Street law firm, Simpson Thacher and Bartlett, a big corporate law firm, sort of in the southern tip of Manhattan, right by Battery Park.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I did paralegal work, and then when my temp gig was over, they hired me on as a regular employee, and that was the job that paid for CalArts. So
Wow.
I worked there, and it was a perfect job, to save up for school because I mean, law firms, it's really a grind. I would work crazy hours,
Yeah.
and if you worked late until late in the night, they would send you home in a limo. They'd give you a dinner voucher and send you home in a limo. So it was like
Yeah.
perfect. I used to work like crazy hours. And I remember one time I think I worked like 126 hours, in a week. There's only 168 hours in a week. I worked 126 hours. It meant that I was just like there all night and sleeping under my desk.
Yeah.
So it was a perfect job for me. And after a year, though, of doing that, I still did not have enough saved up to go to CalArts. So I called up Bob McRae, and he agreed to defer my acceptance for a year. So he said, "You're still in, you can just defer it, you can come 1 year from now." So I did another whole job of doing that, of working 16 hours a day at the law firm,
And just saving everything
saving
you
every
could.
penny.
Yeah.
My parents were great to let me live with them and everything. And after 2 years, I finally had enough saved up to go. So in the summer of 1986, I flew from New York to LA and to begin my career at CalArts in the fall of 1986.
Now, how long were you at Cal Arts and did you graduate? Because a lot of people go to Cal Arts, but they don't
Yes,
do the 4 years. They
yes.
might do 2 years and they get hired at a studio, right?
Yeah, it's very much the case, Dave, and Aljon, if you're there too. I know you're there, Aljon. So back then, it almost functioned as like a trade school. It's like you just went long enough to get hired. Back then, the senior class, when I was a freshman, the senior class only had like 3 or 4 people in it.
Yeah.
It was, basically like you just worked long enough to get hired by the studios. It's totally changed now. I teach it now. It's totally changed now, in which the senior, like more people stay all 4 years and graduate and get the
Right.
degree.
And get a
Back
good
then,
degree. Yeah.
right. But a whole generation of CalArtians only went like 1 or 2 years, got hired and didn't get their degree and didn't go back. And
Yeah.
I went 2 years. My first year was pretty, unremarkable. I went back and worked at that law firm again that summer between my freshman and sophomore years. And then my second year, I went back and like everything clicked. I worked really hard. A big thing too was that at Michigan, I had taken out like my limit of grants, loans, student loans, Pell Grants, everything. So at CalArts, when I went to school at CalArts, I didn't qualify for any loans. I had to pay for everything out of pocket. Every dime that I
Wow.
spent at CalArts came out of my own pocket. So when you do that, like the value of it. It's like I worked hard for 2 years. So I never missed a class. I never missed an
Right.
assignment. Sometimes I would put the assignment on the wall. I'd be the only one who put the assignment up on the wall.
Yeah.
So I took it very seriously. I'll mention too, like we had great teachers then who guided me too. Bob Winquist was the head of the department then. Bob McRae had left at that point. We had Hal Ambro
Hmm.
as animation teacher, the great Hal Ambro, and later Chris Buck was our animation teacher too.
Yeah.
Michael Giamo was our design teacher and was a huge influence on my life and just even like my taste and sensibility in film and food, just in everything. He was like my style guru and a big influence on my life and a good friend to this day. Michael Giamo was a big influence on my life and career.
Yeah.
He was the one who, when I pitched an assignment in class, he said, "Robert, you seem to sort of lean towards like story more. Have you thought about going into that?" Because back then, the job that we all wanted, that we were all training for, was 2D Disney animator. That's the job everybody, 3D didn't exist hardly.
Right.
So
Right.
I thought I'd be like a Disney animator. And he was like, "Have you ever thought of story?" So I said, "No, what does a story person do?" And he had worked that job at Disney, so he talked me through it. So I sort of geared towards that. And I did my student film. My second year was called Simon. And I'll tell you another funny story about that too. I would see Glenn Keane was teaching at CalArts at that point. He wasn't
Yeah.
my direct teacher. He was only teaching the upperclassmen. But I would see him in the design room at night, and he'd be sitting like alone in the design room. Like hard to believe now the
Yeah.
greatest, one of the greatest animators of all time and of his generation. And in other words, no one was taking advantage of him and using him to work on their film. So I went up to him. I said, Glenn, I know I'm not in your class. I'm just a sophomore, but could I show you my scene and stuff like that? And he was so wonderful and so gracious and was really, again, patient with me and worked with me on my scenes and wound up helping me a lot on my film. So much so that my film was about like an 8-year-old boy, Simon. So he's looking at my boards and he goes, "How old is the kid supposed to be in your film?" I said, "Oh, he's about to be like 7 or 8." He goes, "My son Max is exactly that age. He's 8 years old. Could he maybe try out to be the voice?" I said, "Absolutely." So Glenn's son Max wound up being the voice of my student film, Simon.
That's awesome.
Yes. And Glenn did the other voices too. We did the other incidental voices and helped me with a lot of the animation. So that was, that's the great thing about CalArts too. Like you're learning from the masters, you're learning from the best. So the producer show wasn't a juried show back then. It was a much smaller deal. It was held in the Bijou on
Right.
campus. And it wasn't, now you go and it's like
Now,
awesome.
now it's what, at the Geffen
It's
Theater or
at,
something?
right. It's at the Academy,
Yeah.
the Academy Theater, and it's a juried show. The winners, they stand up there with an award. It's like winning an Oscar now.
Right.
Back then, was less of a big deal. It was held in the Bijou. However, a few of the 9 old men were still alive back then. And so that was a big thrill to
Yeah.
meet, like Mark and Alice Davis were regulars and Ollie Johnson too.
Yeah.
So our films played, and afterwards, in the reception afterwards, Ollie Johnson sort of sought me out, and he talked to me, and I had like a moment with Ollie Johnson, and he goes, "Son, I really liked your film a lot. You seem to have the storytelling sensibility that that Disney is looking for," and he said, "You will go far if you can just keep your ego from getting in the way."
Did he say that? Really? Wow.
Sage-wise
And,
advice,
and by the way, it's very true in the business, isn't it, Robert?
right? You have to
Right.
be very true.
I mean, all the people we know in the industry, the ones that have stayed grounded are just, good people, and you want to work with them, right?
Absolutely right.
And
They say that Hollywood grades you and how you play with others, like you want to play well with
yeah.
others. So that was really sage advice. I hope I listened to him. I'm not sure if I always did,
Oh,
but
I
I hope
think you,
I
I
did.
think you did. You're grounded. But you know what? We all know those couple of people over the years who let their egos get in the way of them advancing,
Yeah, absolutely.
or they flamed out because of their egos, you
Right.
know.
You got it. This industry will keep you humble. That is for sure.
Yes,
You know,
absolutely.
so, my
So,
film,
I was going to ask you, you finished this film. Ollie Johnson gives you some wonderful words of praise and advice. Uh, did you go back to CalArts or did you get hired?
so I got hired as an intern in the Disney story department. And I didn't go into animation like the other interns from CalArts went into in between and cleanup, which is like the
Yeah.
class level. But I went right into the Disney story department, and so it was like an 8-week internship, and that would have been the spring of 1988. I walked into Disney.
And I was going to say the spring of '88. I'm thinking that Little Mermaid is in production, right?
So the other interns in my intern class were like Chief Wieboto, Mike Wing,
Yeah.
Cindy Overman. They all, Andrew Schmidt, they all were working on Little Mermaid. Since it had already passed out of story, I didn't get to work on Little Mermaid, even though it was being done in the other buildings.
Yeah, yeah.
When I showed up for work, Dave, I showed up at 1400 Airway because you guys were already off the main lot by then and in sort of
Yeah.
the buildings in Glendale. So I showed up to work at 1400 Airway, Disney Story and Development, first person.
Wait, was it Airway or Flower?
No, because most of you guys were at 1420 Flower,
Oh,
but
you were at
that other
1400
building,
Airway.
which was
Yes.
next to the airport, next to Grand Central Terminal,
Yes.
which was a really cool building, and the tower and everything is still there. It was the
Yeah.
main LA airport, like in the 20s and 30s before they built LAX,
Yeah.
and it was all like still standing. Disney owned it even back then, but it was in a little bit of disrepair. I was glad to see they've
Yeah.
finally renovated, and now it's beautiful.
Completely restored. Yeah.
Right. It was beautiful now.
And it's a historic landmark.
Yes, and it's as
Yeah,
it should be. I mean,
yeah.
Charles Lindbergh, Amelia Earhart flew out of that airfield.
And they did a lot of World War II pilot training out of that
It's
airfield.
just part of
Yeah,
history in that little neighborhood in Glendale.
yeah.
So I showed up to work 1400 Airway. The first person I saw and the first person to greet me was Bernie Mattinson.
Wow.
And I had seen him from, when I used to watch all the Disney making of videos, the
Yeah.
Mickey's Christmas Carol, he directed that and everything. So it was like, wow, wow, Disney director Bernie Mattinson. First person I ever saw was Bernie. So as I said, Little Mermaid had already passed out. I was working on like Mickey Mouse shorts, which would eventually become like Prince and the Pauper. They were developing all like these Mickey Mouse shorts.
I remember that they
Yeah.
wanted to do some new Mickey shorts, so there was a lot of ideas being developed.
Right. So all right, there was Mickey in each and every possible venue, right?
Yeah.
Mickey on Mars, Mickey in prehistoric times, Mickey everywhere. And so I worked on a bunch of those. And then when my internship was over, and then it was like, are they going to keep me or not? I didn't want to go back to CalArts because I had already like spent all my money on those 2 years. I knew when I came out, I had to make it. I knew I had 2 years to make it or
Yeah.
break it. And I had spent every last time. And it's like I had to, I went for broke.
I got a question though. When did you move out of your friend's house? And did he sell it because he was in New York then?
Right. He eventually wound up selling that house and he came back in January of 1984. He had left the Rams. He was now playing for the Jets and he went on to play for other NFL teams, the Browns, the Cowboys. So he sold that house in Orange County. And
Right.
that's when I moved back to live with my parents in New York City.
Got it. Got it. Okay.
They had moved back to our old neighborhood.
Now, are you still friends with the football player?
He's still my best friend for life. And I talked to him.
And he's retired out of the NFL, obviously.
Yes, he had 8 great years in the NFL.
Yeah.
And we are still, bonded and just such good friends. I just saw him a couple of months ago. We did like a little reunion with one of our roommates, Matthew Lassi, and we did like a little reunion.
And
A lifetime best friend.
and you're living. So is he living out in California now, or where did he settle?
Interesting. I mean, he had a typical NFL life in that, they went and traveled around so much for whatever team he was playing for. So he went from the Jets to the Cleveland Browns. He did the best for the Browns. He started for the Browns. So that's where and then he played for the Cowboys too, but he always connected with Cleveland. He bought a home in Cleveland, lived there, raised his family and kids in
Yeah.
Cleveland. Then he went to Pennsylvania. And then he just recently, like weeks ago, moved to Atlanta to see the grandkids and be around the grandkids.
Nice.
So, but lifetime best friend. We're just friends
Yeah.
for life. He's just
That's great.
So, so the internship was coming to an end. It was like an 8-week internship, and people were saying, "Oh, they're going to keep you. Don't worry, they're going to keep you." And then when the internship was over, I got called in the office, and they're like, "We're going to let you go. Good luck back at CalArts and good luck at school." And I was like, "What? Oh no!" I was like, "I don't have the money to go back to school." I left the building. I just started wandering the streets of Airway. Like, what am I going to do? I don't have the money to go back to
Yeah.
school. I don't work for Disney anymore. What am I going to do? I went back into the building, and in the meantime, Joe Rampt, the great Joe Rampt, had
Yeah.
gone to Charlie Fink, who was the head of Disney Development, and said, I want to hire Robert on Rescuers Down Under. He was the head of story on Rescuers Down
Oh,
Under.
good.
He went to bat for me. He said, I'll take him under my wing. I'll mentor him. I'll train him. I want him on my film. And Charlie said, that's fine with me. That's fine. So I got hired. I wasn't going back to CalArts. I got hired on Rescuers Down Under.
So you walked around the block, got a small ulcer, and then came back.
That's right. I came back to a big surprise.
So you were unemployed for a matter of hours.
Only for like 20 minutes, 22 minutes, I was unemployed. And then when I came back in the building, it was like, Charlie wants to see you in his office. And Charlie and Joe were both sitting there smiling. That was like a great moment. And I will always be indebted to Joe Rampt that he went to bat for me to get me hired.
Yeah. Well, Joe was such a great guy, period. He was just a good human being.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Just a master, with his craft too. Just a great person all around.
Yeah.
We really awesome.
Well, I think he was probably one of the greatest story guys of our generation, wouldn't you say?
I said that too. When I teach, I look at it this way, like Bill Pete was the greatest of
Yeah.
like the two generation, and Joe was like the greatest of our generation, like the baby boomer generation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. Hence, well, also Joe Grant. I mean, Joe Grant from,
Yes, and it was great to
from
work with Joe,
back in the
later in life
back
too,
in
and
the
around that
40s.
time.
Yeah. But I mean,
Yeah,
hence the book that John Canemaker did, The Two
yeah.
Joes,
Joe, it was
Yeah.
fantastic,
Joe
right?
Grant and Joe Ranft.
Yes. And Vance Gary was a
Yeah.
great story guy back then, was one of my mentors too. Vance was just wonderful.
Yeah.
Can't say enough about Vance. Patient, kind, would sit with you, go over your drawings. Just a wonderful, and
Funny
talk about
guy.
humbling too.
Very funny
Funny,
guy. Right.
dry wit like that,
Yeah, very
like that
dry humor. Yeah.
BBC type humor,
Yeah.
dry wit, and just and stylish and humble to the
Yeah.
nth. Just a wonderful, kind man. Helped me out a lot too. So worked on Rescuers Down Under, then went on to Prince and the Pauper under George Scribner, and
Right.
this was sort of the fruition of all the Mickey Mouse vehicles they were working on.
Yeah.
So worked on that, boarded on that. That had some great, had amazing people on it too. Great Disney story team, story department, also great animators too, right? And Andreas Deja, I believe,
Yeah.
did some great stuff on that film too. And then from there went on to Beauty and the Beast. So, as you know, like the animators were off the main lot at that point. We were in the sort of that warehouse district in Glendale. For some reason, for Beauty and the Beast, they brought us back to the main lot. And we worked in the old ink and paint buildings. So even though I didn't get to work in that original Disney animation, the famous
Sure.
Disney animation building, like somebody did, I did get to work on the main lot in one of those historical buildings. So that was really
Yeah.
cool. And no, there was a little bit, there was more of the main lot was still in existence back then, sort of the Americana town, the Zorro I think was already gone, but like it was before, it was the Americana town got made.
Yeah, the town the sort of the
The
town
town square and
square
everything was there, and everything.
where they did something wicked
Something
this
wicked this
way
way comes.
comes, and
Right.
then you went around the back end of that and into the Victorian Street,
Right. That was also in
which
existence. That was beautiful.
yeah,
And cool to see
yeah,
sort of that great, piece of the lot. I think there's just like one street that survives
yeah.
there. Um, what else about Beauty and the Beast? So another great thing about
Well,
Beauty,
yeah, you know what I was going to say, Robert, because we're starting to bump up against time, and I want to pick this up in our second episode with you. Do you want to finish talking about Beauty and the Beast, and then we'll pick up on the next project next week?
okay, we could do that, sure.
Yeah, so
Okay,
go ahead
so
and
I'll finish
finish.
up on Beauty and the
Yeah,
Beast.
finish talking about Beauty and the Beast and what your recollections are working on that.
Okay. One great thing I remember about that is that, the great Howard Ashman and Alan Menken, they were in-house. Like they didn't mail in those songs. That was a great thing. Like you could hear them plunking on the piano, like across the hallway, working out those songs. Little town, little village, you could hear them working out the songs. So that
Yeah.
was pretty cool and pretty great. That again, they didn't just mail it in. They were there in-house with and they wanted to be like in the story meetings, like Howard Ashman, a great story mind, Alan Menken, they wanted to be in the story meetings. They wanted to be very present. And they,
And I think that inclusion really added to the success of those films during that period. You
yeah,
know,
it was a great feeling, for sure.
whether it was Little Mermaid or Beauty and the Beast or Aladdin, there was an energy in the building, wasn't there?
Yeah, definitely a great, like a spirit decor, great, like, we're all in this together and a great,
Yeah.
great camaraderie during that
Yeah.
time. Like we're going to make something special. We're really going to show people and
Yeah.
everything. And remember, like, the studio was down for a number of years. The films weren't, doing as well. We were sort of, going neck and neck with the Bluth films, right? So,
Yeah.
and then Little Mermaid was the ring that really sort of leapfrogged the studio. In the same calendar year, 1989, Little Mermaid and Roger Rabbit come out, and then like Disney's off to the races.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, during that period, it was really an American Tale from Bluth, which did very well. You had Who Framed Roger Rabbit in '88, and then Little Mermaid in '89. It's like those three films really kind of, I always say, those ignited the Renaissance in animation.
Yeah, absolutely, Dave.
You know?
Absolutely. Right.
And when you were working on Beauty and the Beast, you as a story artist, you're usually rolling off of those films as they're going into the thick of production, right?
Yeah, you're in story, you're the first one's on, the first one's off.
Yeah.
What about my work on the film? I was always, they cast story artists the same way they cast actors, right? You're a drama person or a comedy person. I was always cast as sort of like a gag and comedy guy. So I boarded these whole scenes in the final film, Belle's dad, Maurice, he leaves the castle, he leaves his home and he's on his way to the invention fair. And then he gets caught up, he gets lost, and then he ends up at the Beast Castle.
Yeah.
So I boarded the scenes where he actually made it to the invention fair. He made it to the invention convention. All the wacky inventions that people would come up with and make. I had scenes and scenes of that.
So, I think this is a great place for us to stop, Robert, and we'll pick it up next week with what you went on to after you finished Beauty and the Beast. How's that sound?
That sounds great, Dave.
All right, man. It was great having you on the Skull Rock podcast. We'll look forward to talking to you more next week. Thanks, Robert.
Thanks so much for having me, Dave. And thank you, John, as well. Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, everybody. This is John Pomeroy, animator, producer, artist, and you are listening to Skull Rock Podcast.
Skull Rock Podcast is thrilled to announce that we are now on Patreon. Dive deeper into the world of animation, films, and behind-the-scenes stories with your hosts Al-John Go and Dave Bossert. Not only will you be helping to keep the magic alive, but will be part of our special community. We want to thank our Skull Rock crew members, Steve Minch and Chris Banas, for their support. If you would like to join our Skull Rock crew, please visit our Patreon link in our show notes or visit patreon.com/Skull Rock Podcast. Thank you for listening and for your continued support of everything we do.
Well, gang, once again, thank you so much for tuning into the show. We do appreciate it. Feel free to subscribe and like all of our shows. Go back through in the Spotify archive and check it out, if you will. Link is in the show notes. If you're finding us on YouTube, be sure to subscribe and click that bell for notifications every time we post new content. We would appreciate it. You can also email us with those questions and comments as well. Dave at skullrockpodcast.com or Aljon, ALJON, at skullrockpodcast.com. Don't forget to check me out on Instagram. I do appreciate it. Aljon Go. You can also check out my other podcast with my host, Kristen, my wife, Dining at Disney podcast. We launch every single week, as well as being aired on Sorcerer Radio at srsounds.com, a proud distributor of our program as well at srsounds.com. All Disney music all day long. Dave?
I got confirmation that Bob Weiss, the former president of Walt Disney Imagineering, will be coming to Nashville. He will be signing copies of his Ghost Dog novel as well as his Dream Chaser book. Both books. He's going to be signing copies at the Animation Y'all Festival. So, folks, you get a chance to meet one of the top Imagineers, Bob Weiss. He was the president of Walt Disney Imagineering. He oversaw the building of Shanghai Disneyland. Yeah. And he's an incredibly nice guy. So, if you get a chance, come out to the Animation Y'all Expo in Nashville. I want to remind our listeners, my Tunes Behind the Tunes show is on Sirius XM, Disney Hits, channel 133. February, we're featuring the Feed the Birds from Disney's 1964 classic, Mary Poppins. You can also check out a lot of my books at theoldmillpress.com, including my latest book, Find Your Happy Place, the 8-Step Guide to Boosting Your Creativity Through a Personal Retreat, winner of a gold medal at the Fire Book Awards in Texas. And folks, if you're looking to make a change for the coming year, check out that book. Find your happy place. You
go.
can also go to davidbossert.com. There's all kinds of free stuff there. And with that, Aljon, I'm going to say go out and have a fantastic week. I'm looking forward to seeing you in person at the Animation Y'all Festival in Nashville, Tennessee in a couple of weeks. It's going to be a lot of fun. We'll be in the same room together, the first time in 5 years that we've been doing this podcast. So anyway, go out, have a fantastic week, everybody. Be kind to one another, and we'll see you back here next Monday right here on the Skull Rock Podcast.
I'm so down with Disney's travel deals. Kristen has got a tremendous amount of booking experience, travel experience, whether it's a cruise line, whether it's Disney, the Disney parks, Universal. She's got you covered. Years and years of experience, and she's able to.
Can you believe it's been 14 years now?
No.
14 years.
It's been 14 years of you being a travel agent?
Yep.
My goodness. Well, I tell you what, Kristen, what is the deal of deals to start off 2025?
Well, for those of you that like free dining, it is back. You can enjoy a free Disney dining plan when you purchase a non-discounted minimum 3-night, 3-day ticket package, which includes both your room, hotel, and theme park ticket with the park hopper option. And this is going to be for arrival most nights from May 27th to June 26th, July 7th to August 6th. So perfect timing when the kids are out of school for you to go and enjoy some free dining.
I like it. I like it. And I know that we'll probably talk about how to make the most of your Disney dining plan and some really good ideas in terms of dining. So I know that that's going to be in our future. But in the meantime, gang, as you're looking at booking your vacation, take the worry and stress out of planning it. Have Kristen do it for you and give you some expert advice about the Disney dining plan, because this is the Dining at Disney podcast after all, right? So people, where can people email you to get their trip started and to get their free quote?
They can contact me at themeparksandcruises@gmail.com.